What's up, everyone? So, some interesting news out of Canada, believe it or not. Back in November of 2024, the Ontario Provincial Police launched Project Bionic through their Organized Crime Enforcement Bureau, making their first major operation that specifically targeted darknet drug trafficking through the Canadian Post. Now, someone must have finally told them about Silk Road 13 years after it actually launched and 11 years after it got shut down. It took them 5 months to track down the network that was actually moving some fairly serious weight through the Canadian postal system all across Canada. No doubt because someone left fingerprints inside a package or used their real name or their real return address or posted about their operation on Instagram or some dumb stuff like that. I have no doubt is going to be the reason behind the actual bust. It reminds me of like those genius dealers who kept getting busted for flexing their cash on social media, which we see all the time. The investigation traced packages from suppliers centered in Hamilton to buyers spread across almost every corner of Canada, from British Columbia to Nunavut to Alberta to Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island. A nationwide distribution network using Canada's Posts as their private courier package, basically packaging poison in envelopes and shipping it coast to coast. I am not a fan of Fent or H or any of that kind of stuff. That was why when I was a darknet vendor, I never sold any of that crap. I think that, along with stuff like meth, just absolutely takes people's souls. The geographic reach basically shows what happens when vendors get comfortable and sloppy with their operational security. Even though no real specifics have actually been mentioned about the operation, they haven't actually detailed how they got these guys, which usually means it's something stupid. I mean, that's really what it is at the end of the day. Most of the time, when they don't want to talk about it, there's a reason for that. It's like really dumb mistakes. Because when it's like some amazing thing, they love to brag about it. Whether it's the FBI using some kind of exploits to get people or whatever, that information always comes out. And they typically like to brag about it if it's technical prowess. So that's why I don't think it is. Now, on March 10th of 2025, the OPP intercepted 86 postal packages at a Canadian Post facility in Ottawa. Each one contained pieces of what they claimed was the $2.5 million drug empire. So, two people got actually arrested that day on site. The operation ended up expanding to something like 19 total arrests, though law enforcement basically loves padding numbers. That's one thing we see all the time. So, the 4 from Ottawa that were caught were actually charged with 85 charges combined, while 15 others scattered across southern Ontario probably included stuff like delivery drivers and girlfriends and anyone, loosely kind of connected that the cops couldn't actually squeeze. It's one of the kind of classic domino effects of like grabbing one person, they flip that person so that person saves their own skin, and suddenly everyone who ever accepted a package is getting raided. So the drug seizures tell you these vendors move weight because basically they forgot about basic security, and we'll get into that in a minute. Because there are a few things that we can discern through the nonsense that they actually posted. A lot of it being, what law enforcement saw as W's that they ended up posting. So, but we'll start with what is actually a accomplishment, in my opinion, anyways, which is the 5.5 keys of Fent that they took off the street. So they took off, the markets, which is, I mean, it's great. It does, end people. So, like, at the end of the day, I don't think it's a good thing, it being out there. I also think people should be free, again, I'll say it again, to do whatever they want, but I don't think that it's a good thing that kind of stuff exists. It's a cat and mouse game. Like, they're gonna do their job trying to bust people, and, the people that get busted make it so that the market now has less people actually selling, so it makes it a profit factor for you to sell. So you're always going to have people who are going to step in to replace those people almost no matter what. So they started with, 5.5 keys of fent, right? At a lethal dose of just 2 milligrams per person, that's enough poison basically to end 2.75 million people. So, someone handing that much product kind of should know better, than whatever amateur mistakes led cops to the door in the first place. Now, add 7.6 keys of suspected methamphetamines and 3.7 keys of MDMA powder, which is definitely a good time. And 2 keys of H, 1.8 keys of coke, 1.4 keys of ketamine, and 5.8 keys of hash, which again, I would say is a good time. And you're looking at over 27 keys of various substances from vendors who clearly prioritize profits over things like security protocols. Kind of the only 2 things I don't take issue with out of that whole list is the MDMA and the hash. Now, the pharmaceutical side shows a similar scale with really bad execution at 47,955 hydromorphone tablets, 6,580 methylphenate tablets, 3,175 morphine tablets, 2,395 MDMA tablets, 1,785 oxycodone tablets, 715 pregabalin tablets, which I have no idea what that even is, plus 40 fentanyl patches and 40 steroid vials. All in all, there's 64,000 tablets across the 37 drugs that were actually available for us to see. I was going to list all the drugs because it's not really necessary for this video. But anyways, running a criminal pharmacy at this scale while making mistakes that are very basic, enough for the OPP anyway to catch you, who's, you know, decades behind, takes special kinds of incompetence. So beyond the drugs the investigators actually uncovered, these vendors had actually breached into other crimes. This is where we get into the stupidity. A stolen 2018 Ferrari 488 Spider convertible that was worth over 400,000 sat in their collection, along 11 other stolen vehicles valued at $730,000 total. 2 Toyota Highlanders and some other stupid cars that are Toyotas who no one actually cares about. Like, they're not high-end vehicles, so why they felt the need to, brag about them as if they were some amazing thing is beyond me. But, the tools for operation were fraudulent license plates. Again, very stupid thing to do. Reprogrammable key fobs, which kind of makes sense, and diagnostic programmer tools, which again also makes sense if you're going to be stealing cars. But nothing really says, low profile darknet vendor like collecting stolen luxury cars. It's just like, please pull me over, The cops also seized approximately 95,000 in Canadian currency. Now, multifaceted criminal operations that span narcotics and auto theft that accumulate wealth and weapons are exactly the kind of flashy behavior that gets vendors caught. Search operations hit multiple locations, raids on 3 homes and a vehicle in Gloucester and another place on March 10th, followed by another search on March 27th that recovered the stolen vehicle collection from a location on Ottawa's outskirts. The fact that they found everything so easily suggests that these vendors kept all their illegal assets pretty close to home instead of property, that was compartmentalized and separate from them under different names. Now, the OPP managed to actually trace vendor operations through the postal system. This likely came down to just catastrophically stupid OpSec failures rather than police competence, which is always the case. Now, when vendors leave fingerprints inside packages or reuse addresses or maintain patterns, one investigation can unravel pretty much everything. Orders placed through darknet marketplaces got packaged and shipped using various courier services, with Canadian Post as the primary network. The domestic focus, meaning no international trafficking was actually mentioned in any of the articles that I was able to dig up, suggests that the vendors who at least understood border crossings multiply the risks, even if they failed other security measures. I would be curious to know about the local production, like how they were actually getting this stuff or if they're actually making it themselves. Again, I couldn't really find any information out there on it. The timing, though, reveals how behind the curve Canadian law enforcement really remains. Like I said before, launching in November of 2024 and wrapping in March of 2025. This is a 5-month investigation, and it represents the OPP finally noticing darknet markets exist after over a decade of operation. And they call it their first of its kind operation as some kind of flex, admitting that, they've been chasing street dealers while sophisticated vendors move keys through the mail. And this is the same OPP that had officers taking bribes from tow truck drivers in 2022. So, sudden darknet expertise probably came from lucky breaks rather than developed capabilities and sophistication. Now, Project Bionic contributed to seizures totaling 43.5 kilograms of fentanyl across related operations. I know that number sounds impressive, and it kind of is, but you have to realize that that amount moves through various channels every few days. Like, the cops that made the announcement want to pretend that they're evolving their capabilities, but really they just caught vendors who forgot that operational security means more than using Tor. For vendors operating in Canada, Project Bionic should be a slap on the back of the head to smarten them up and should remind them what not to do, which is basically be complacent in your OpSec or commit other dumb crimes while running your op. The 4 people facing 85 charges probably ran the actual operation, while the other 15 arrests are likely, anyone that the cops couldn't loosely connect, directly to these guys, like reshippers who thought they were moving electronics, people who let packages get sent to their addresses for a few bucks, maybe even some poor secretary who actually processed payments or, without knowing that it was like an illegal business, maybe answer the phones. Now, law enforcement always inflates their numbers to make their bust sound bigger. And the question now becomes whether the OPP stumbled onto something that they can actually replicate, or if it was just, catching the lowest hanging fruit in an otherwise vendor favorable environment. And based on the track record of, being corrupt and incompetent, the smart money kind of says the latter, right? So it'll be interesting to see how this shakes out, see with them how the indictments goes. I'll be curious to see if any of you have any additional details. Definitely share them in the links below. I'd also like to know, what do you guys think? Like, what do you think was their downfall? How do you think that they ended up, busting all these people? Mainly the 4 primary ones. After those 4 primary ones, I can kind of guess how they got the other 19. And it most likely is in reverse. They probably got some low hanging person, and then that person implicated literally everyone else, because we're not talking about some kind of crazy superseding indictment with, hundreds of defendants. This is a relatively small operation in contrast to a lot of the darknet, ops that have happened in the past, which I have another video coming out on another one of those. But I wanted to cover this because it was basically fresh in the news. In any case, thank you for watching to the end. And as always, I'll catch you guys in the next video.